Hello and welcome viewers, I am Pia and you're watching the Africa Brief on NewsX. Well, let's take a look at the top stories this hour. Cameroon's opposition challenger Issa Chiroma Bakary has claimed election victory against incumbent President Paul Biya, who's been in power for 43 years. The official results for the weekend vote are not expected for 2 weeks, even though tally sheets show Bakary in a clear lead. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has stated that his country will host a conference on the reconstruction of Gaza following a deal for the ceasefire and hostage prisoner exchange. French President Emmanuel Macron has expressed a deep concern of the situation in Madagascar but refuses to confirm speculation that the Indian Ocean Islands embattled leader Andry Rajoelina has been evacuated by France. Kenyan lawmakers have passed a bill to regulate digital assets like cryptocurrencies as it seeks to boost investment into the sector by putting clear rules in place for the emerging industry. Legislators have enacted the Virtual Asset Service Providers Bill seeking to address worries over the lack of clear regulations to govern the sector. Air France has suspended flights between Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport and Madagascar's capital, Antananarivo, from October 11th to the 13th of October, inclusive due to the security situation on the ground. At least 42 people have been killed in a bus crash in a mountainous region of northern South Africa. The crash took place on the N1 highway near Makedo in the Limpopo province. Many of the travelers were citizens of Zimbabwe and Malawi, who are en route to their home countries from the city of Kibera in the Eastern Cape. Right, viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. What's happening in Madagascar? Madagascar's cornered President Andry Rajoelina is defying mounting pressure to resign, even as the country plunges deeper into political turmoil. In a rare live broadcast from an undisclosed location, Rajoelina stated that he is sheltering in a safe place after what he called attempts on his life and a planned coup. He claimed that a group of military officers and politicians plotted to assassinate him, forcing him into hiding. Widespread protests led by young activists known as Gen Z Mara have gripped the country for weeks. Demonstrators want Rajoelina to step down. His move to fire the entire cabinet failed to ease tensions. The powerful army unit CAPSAT has now declared control over the military, with some soldiers joining the protests as well. Opposition leaders insist that Rajoelina has already fled the country, a claim that he denies. Take a look at what he's had to say.
Efa niarana hita fa ny crise rehetra, ny fandimby sy ny tranga teto amin'ny firenena dia nitarika faharavana sy fiemorana fa dia nisy tokoa ny telo-dratsy hatramin'ny fahadimy amin'ny roapolo ny volana septambra teo anaovana ny fanonganam-panjakana ifofona ny aiko.
Joining us on the broadcast is Osanyan Taiwo, Policy and Strategic Implementation Expert from Abuja in Nigeria. Thank you so much for taking out time and speaking to us on NewsX World. We've been seeing Madagascar on the boil, and now President Andry Rajoelina has claimed that there's been an assassination plot against him, an attempt of a coup also occurring. Where do you see the situation in Madagascar heading to next, because it's been spiraling out of control over the last couple of weeks?
Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. Firstly, I must sincerely and honestly feel so sorry for the people of Madagascar, considering what they are facing at this current political turmoil. It is one of the most difficult points in time that we face a lot of political crisis where presidents have president lose faith in the populace, and then there's always this agitation coming up for citizens, creating a situation where they are requesting for presidents to resign. This cannot only be far-fetched from the fact that the citizens have been changed in the aim of affairs of the governance of their states, I mean the countries. And this has been a replica in different parts of Africa, bringing in different revolutions that has actually metamorphosed and made Africa to decline from a democratic state to some state being controlled by the military dictatorship. Having set that template as an introduction, it is very important to state that the president of President Rajoelina has been a president that the people of Madagascar, realistically speaking, have not felt any sort of impact. When we look at the FDI, that's the foreign directive investment, when we look at development in the African region of Madagascar, when we also further look at other tenets that makes or that defines a developed country, we cannot say Madagascar is actually one country that we can push forward. However, is a method of trying to oustat the president. Is it the best method? I don't think it's the best method. I think the people of Madagascar would actually sit down to realize how best and what best fit for them. And that is where the people would have to decide what is good for them. Impeachment might be impeachment fine. As sitting in a constitutional manner, good, but not in that approach where his life is being threatened and he has to run for safe havens.
All right, sir, requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking further developments. A total of 165 organizations have now criticized South Africa for failing to make progress on debt sustainability issues during its presidency of the G20 grouping. The organizations have now urged South Africa to push for reforms before it hands over the presidency to the United States on the 1st of December. In a letter to South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, which was released on the first day of the annual International Monetary Fund and World Bank meetings in Washington, the groups have now called for the cancellation of all unsustainable and illegitimate debts to protect funds needed for education, health, gender equality and climate resilience. Remember, viewers, the United States is due to assume the G20 presidency on the 1st of December, shortly after a leaders' summit to be attended by US Vice President J.D. Vance instead of Trump. This is the latest that we're tracking. We're learning that a total of 165 organizations have criticized South Africa for failing to make progress on debt sustainability issues during its presidency of the G20 grouping. The organizations have urged South Africa to push for reforms before it hands over the presidency to the United States on the 1st of December. There will be a summit of the G20 economies that is going to be held very, very soon. And United States, which is going to take over the presidency of the group of 20 nations, is going to be represented by US Vice President J.D. Vance instead of Donald Trump. Now, these 165 organizations have urged the G20 to push for radical reforms of debt restructuring processes. They've backed the creation of both an African credit rating agency and a borrowers club in order to facilitate cooperation among debtor countries and to push for an agreement to sell IMF gold reserves in order to set up a debt relief fund as well. They are already expressed that they are saddled with high debt levels and have faced additional burdens given US President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs that have impacted the global economy. The World Bank back in April had stated that half of some 150 developing countries are either unable to make debt service payments or are at risk of getting there. Meanwhile, these 165 organizations have come out and put out a letter and they've penned this letter to South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, and have called for the cancellation of all unsustainable and illegitimate debts in order to protect funds needed for education, health, gender equality, climate resilience and overall development. With us on the broadcast is Osanyin Taiwo from Abuja in Nigeria. What do you make of these demands that are being put forth? There are some interesting statistics as well that have come to light. The total debt in emerging markets has risen by $3.4 trillion. This has been worsened because of the impact of Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs as well. What are the concerns that these organizations and that the African nations have at large with regards to high debt clauses and the clauses for relief as well that have been imposed by the IMF and World Bank?
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. So, firstly, we must understand that South African representation in the G20 chair, as a G20 chair, is actually sort of an handicap representation for the African region, because it is the only country that represents the African region in the G20. Now, I will set that template right. It's very important to state that the G20 global financial system, or the global financial system, still favors creditor nations. And without any reform, there is never going to be a common framework for debt treatment. Because these developed nations see Africa as a place to lead and transact for more funds to be brought into the African region. And then it's also a means that develops the region that I'm talking about, the global north versus the global south of Africa. In the real sense of it, there's only a limit that South Africa can actually plunge its own position into. Rather, what I actually suggest and propagate is that African nations, African leaders must sit together from the African Union to other sub-regional nations like SADC, that's South Africa Development Countries, like ECOWAS, and whatever you, must come together as a nation, as an African nation, to sit down and look for ways and approaches to increase their financial standards, whereby their own voice can be heard in the international system.
All right, with that, I would like to thank you for taking out time, sharing your perspective on these very crucial developments. Meanwhile, viewers, we're tracking some rather tragic news coming in. We're learning that at least 42 people have lost their lives and 49 others are injured after a bus plunged off a mountainous road in northern South Africa. The crash occurred on Sunday evening on the N1 highway near Louis Trichardt, around 400 kilometers north of Pretoria. The bus, which was carrying Zimbabwean and Malawian nationals, was heading towards Zimbabwe when it veered off the road and tumbled down an embankment. Authorities have confirmed that 7 children, 17 men and 18 women have lost their lives in this crash. Meanwhile, emergency teams are working round the clock in order to rescue survivors. 6 people are in a critical condition at the moment, including a child who was airlifted to a hospital nearby. 31 others suffered serious injuries as well. Now, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has offered condolences to the governments of Zimbabwe and Malawi, calling the incident a tragic loss during South Africa's Transport Safety Month. Now, the cause of this particular accident remains unknown. Officials in the meantime are investigating this matter. This is the second major bus disaster in Limpopo in the last 2 years. With that, viewers, we're tracking further updates. We're now learning that local officials have confirmed that suspected Islamic State-linked rebels have killed 19 civilians in eastern Congo. Military administrator for Lubero territory has stated that the attack took place in the village of Mukondo in the North Kivu province. He has added that the death toll may rise as rescue efforts continue. Now, the assailants, who are believed to be from the Allied Democratic Forces, also known as the Islamic State Central Africa province, they wore uniforms resembling those of the Congolese army. This disguise is what allowed them to enter the village without raising suspicion. Once inside, the rebels attacked villagers using guns, knives and clubs. The ADF has not yet claimed responsibility for this latest attack, but the group has been linked to several deadly assaults in recent months. Now, authorities are continuing their investigation. They've called for increased support to restore stability in eastern Congo. With us on the broadcast is Dr. Gilles Emmanuel Jacquet, International Relations Professor, joining us from Geneva. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us. So we're seeing the violence in eastern Congo continue to escalate. In the meantime, could you explain to our viewers what are the key factors contributing to this persistent instability?
Thanks for your invitation. Unfortunately, the Democratic Republic of Congo is facing serious instability and a series of internal conflicts since its independence, mainly in its eastern provinces in Ituri or in Kivu. The eastern provinces are particularly rich in resources, like mineral resources, like coltan, gold, and many other resources. We have as well uranium in Shaba. So it's a region with very valuable resources, but it's ethnically divided. You have ethnic groups competing for the control of the resources and as well for political power. And some of these groups have ties as well to neighboring countries like Rwanda or Uganda in the past. So this problem is, let's say, structural problem we have in Congo since its independence.
And we do know that North Kivu is a mineral-rich region that has seen continuous armed conflict. How does this region's economic significance and the fact that it has such a vast arsenal of natural resources contribute to exacerbating this violence?
The resources we have in Kivu, or more generally in Eastern Congo, are very important mineral resources like coltan. Are highly needed for the high-tech industry, for mobile phones and computers. So it creates as well a lot of, I would say, ambitions. Rwanda, for example, doesn't possess these resources, but it's a big exporter of these resources. They are smuggled through its territory. More generally now as well, we have a very weak state in Congo. Since its independence, the central power in Kinshasa faces a lot of difficulties in exercising control over its eastern provinces because there the governors or as well the warlords, they act as alternative powers compared to the central power we have in the capital city. You have a lot of corruption as well, corruption among state officials and military officials who are operating as well in eastern Congo. And all this wealth is creating somehow a sort of curse, what some scholars as well call the resource curse, when rich countries or countries that should be rich because of their abundance of resources are in fact poor and very often in conflict because of corruption, bribes, ethnic division, smuggling, and so on.
Indeed, and we're also seeing that in this particular instance, as in several other attacks that have taken place in the recent past, it's Islamic State-linked rebels who have carried out these attacks. What does this tell us about the spread of extremist ideologies, particularly in Central Africa? Because Congo is not the only country that has been impacted by this.
Right. Originally in Congo, especially since its independence, the ideology of most armed groups was either Marxist ideologies during the Cold War, as we had with the Simba, for example. But gradually as well, Marxism lost its relevance with the end of the Cold War. And most of these groups we have in Eastern Congo had some ethno-nationalist claims like more power or even secession in some cases like the proxies supported by Rwanda. Now we have as well the rise in some regions of Africa of Islamic fundamentalism. Islamic fundamentalism was not really a very common phenomenon in DR Congo in past decades. But with the conflicts in Uganda, in Sudan, in Chad, with the destabilization of the Sahel region after the collapse of the Gaddafi regime in Libya, we had the boom of religious extremism in Africa going through the, let's say, Sahelian region, and as well causing problems in many northern regions of African countries like Nigeria, Ivory Coast, and we have now, which is in a way unique, Congo, with the main, let's say, Islamist group being the Allied Democratic Forces, the ADF.
And speaking of international action, what challenges have peacekeeping missions really faced in this region?
It's a very relevant question. We have as well UN missions, UN peacekeeping operations in Congo since more or less its independence as well. The current mission, the MONUSCO as well, is in Congo for more than a decade, and it's facing various problems in trying to enforce UN resolutions and as well trying to push armed groups to disarm. There have been as well many cases of misconduct, like sexual abuses committed as well by blue helmets in Congo. And you have among the population a kind of fatigue, a strong sense of fatigue and as well doubts with regard to the presence of these foreign forces or blue helmets, these UN peacekeeping forces, because for some locals, they are not so efficient and they're even viewed in some cases as a part of the problem. We have different means as well, different measures like the Kimberley process or others to check as well the mining industry there and to make sure that it's not fueling bribes or armed groups, but it's not efficient as well and effective.
All right, so with that, I would like to thank you for taking out time sharing your perspective on these very delicate developments. With that, viewers, we're shifting focus towards news coming in from Cameroon. Cameroonians await the results of presidential elections with long-standing President Paul Biya and his opponent, former Minister Issa Chiroma Bakary, both claiming to be leading as vote counting is underway. Now, Cameroon's opposition candidate Issa Chiroma has already claimed victory in the country's October 12th presidential election, urging President Paul Biya to accept defeat and honor the truth of the ballot box. Chiroma, a former government spokesperson and employment minister as well, broke ranks with President Biya earlier this year and mounted a campaign that drew large crowds and endorsements from a coalition of opposition parties and civic groups as well. Biya is the world's oldest serving head of state and is seeking an 8th term after 43 years in power. Analysts had expected his control over state institutions and a fragmented opposition to give him an edge in the election despite growing public discontent over economic stagnation and insecurity. Now, Cameroon's electoral law allows results to be published and posted at polling stations, but final tallies must be validated by the Constitutional Council, which has until the 26th of October to announce the outcome. Now, a merchant from Cameroon seeking change in the government has spoken on the elections. Listen in to what he's had to say.
Et maintenant, le changement viendra lorsque nous-mêmes, les Camerounais, on saura que telle ou telle chose n'est pas bien. Voilà. Parce que, franchement, les Camerounais sont... il faudrait que même celui qui viendra ou bien celui qui va rester apprend à collaborer avec le peuple.
With us on the broadcast is Mr. Gautam Mukherjee. He's a senior journalist joining us from New Delhi. So we're seeing some really interesting developments coming in. Cameroon's opposition challenger Issa Chiroma Bakary has claimed election victory against incumbent President Paul Biya, who's been in power for a long 43 years. The official results for the vote is slated to be declared in another 2 weeks. The deadline is the 26th of October. But in the meantime, even though tally sheets have been put out outside individual polling stations, they show that Bakary, the opposition candidate, is in a clear lead. Do you then foresee that finally, after 43 long years, Paul Biya would be replaced? And if that is the scenario, would he challenge it, considering his old age now?
Well,
Mr. Mukherjee, yes, that's for you.
The chances of Biya getting another term after 43 years are not very good. He's old. He is due for, replacement, because many of his former colleagues have stood up and challenged him at the hustings. The chances of Biya winning again are not very good. At the same time, he knows the levers of power. He knows how to manipulate the political system. And so he won't go without a fight. However, I think in the end, he'll have to go.
Indeed. And, speak in case there is a change in the leadership of Cameroon. His challenger, Biya's challenger, Issa Chiroma, has been a part of the entire machinery under Biya. He knows the ins and outs of the system as well. Do you think there could be any challenges that he could face? Because there is a lot of economic stagnation that is taking place as well. How do you think he would navigate then through this system?
Well, one is he knows the system because he's worked under Biya. Two is he's apparently won the elections fair and square, and the economic problems of the Cameroons will have to be faced by whether it is Biya or his challenger. So, those are definitely the realities of the situation, and they'll have to be faced by whoever comes into power.
All right, sir. With that, I would like to thank you for taking out time and sharing your perspective on developments that are taking place in Cameroon. With that, viewers, it's a wrap on the Africa Breach on NewsX World. Stay tuned for more such updates.